Here we go for another episode of Always Another Game. And today, with me, Shaun, the behavior coach, I'm going inside the mind of somebody that actually probably is inside my mind as we're sitting here as well. Because today with me, I've got a clinical hypnotherapist, a mindset coach. And at the tender age of 8 years old, he earned his black belt in Taekwondo. Today with me, I've got Stuart Wade. Stuart, how's it going?
Hi, Shaun. It's good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's awesome. Just for context, this is a huge turnaround. Stu and I just met and just got introduced a couple of days ago, and we said, let's get this done. Let's get it in. And here we are. So I do appreciate you making time for me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Excellent. So how I like to start the podcast straight into it, just so the audience gets to know you, is who is Stuart Wade?
Sure. So aside from part-time magpie, with all the shiny things behind me, I am a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I often define myself as a martial artist above everything, but obviously my professional life and my business, that's a big part of what I do now. But I also work a lot within martial arts and working with martial artists and athletes in that kind of realm as well. But yeah, martial artist, clinical hypnotherapist, those two are the big identity roles, I assume.
Yeah, and that's the first thing I said. I said, had a nice little trophy collection there, just a few. So, hey, it's all good, right? It's all good. Really interesting, actually. I've just caught something there, and it's only because it's been a topic of my last few conversations I've had on the podcast. And one thing you said is, I am a martial artist, and this has come up with people labeling themselves with, I am an ice hockey player, I am, an endurance athlete.
Yeah.
What's your stance on that kind of labeling yourself as a type of person, type of sports performer? Do you think it's healthy? Do you think it's something that's not an issue?
It's a really good question, Shaun, because I personally think it's a good thing as long as it's a healthy attachment. That's the thing. You see it, the classic example of the former professional footballers that once they've retired, for whatever reason, they just can't seem to handle it, and they turn to the booze or the drugs or whatever it is, and it very much I'm sure there's other things going on there as well, but on the outside, it seems that they assumed that role. I am a footballer. And then when that's gone, who am I? And for me personally, I like to think I've got a healthy attachment to it. I can't ever remember not doing martial arts in some way, shape, or form. I started when I was 6 years old. So it is very much a part of me and who I am. And a lot of the values that it ingrained in me from such a young age, I very much have taken ownership of those. And so that's why I tend to label myself as a martial artist in that respect. As I say, as long as there's a healthy attachment to it, if God forbid you are an athlete in some sport, whatever that might be, let's say a martial artist, but you suffer a career-ending injury that means you can't physically do it anymore. That's where the challenge comes in, and that's where you have to go inside and perhaps reframe that relationship, that identity with martial arts. It's something that we hope that we never have to encounter, but we cross that bridge if and when we come to it. I think in a roundabout way, I think it's a good thing as long as there is a healthy attachment and an awareness to it that you are worthy. Even without that, you are enough just as you are, but it's something that is going to take some practice.
Yeah, I like the way you framed that, because for years I was a hockey player. Came to a crossroad and decided to go semi-pro so I could work and play. And I think because of that, I did start to detach myself from I am a hockey player, because I am a personal trainer. I had this other thing. And when I retired because I lost the love for the sport at the time. And I had something else to fall back on and focus. And here we are today. I've only just recently actually got back into ice hockey. I'm helping coaching, and awesome. I didn't realize kind of like how much I missed it. So I think you're right. It's that Yes, you are. Yes, I am an ice hockey player. It's been a huge part of my life. It's again a huge reason why we're sitting here.
Yeah.
And it, like you said, it's the relationship with it, and also potentially having that other purpose on the side. So, you know, for you with the hypnotherapy, I would love to know a little bit more about exactly what it is, how it works, because I think I mentioned on one podcast, I was very close to getting hypnotherapy at one point. People used to tell me I was addicted to Pepsi Max. Turns out I was only sleeping 4 hours a night, and there's 80 milligrams of caffeine in Pepsi Max, and I didn't drink tea or coffee. So there was a root cause, but I was very close, you know, to going down that route. So what is hypnotherapy?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I don't have my pocket watch to hand. It's another joke. I don't own a pocket watch. But so hypnotherapy is, well, let's break it down. So hypno comes from the Greek hypnos, which means sleep, and therapy is, you know, a therapeutic intervention. Now, when you're in a state of hypnosis, you don't actually go to sleep, but, you know, to the untrained eye, it might look like one is asleep when under hypnosis, but actually it's just an altered state of consciousness. It's an altered state of awareness in which our brains can become more suggestible, okay, more open to positive suggestion. The critical faculties that we all have as adults that might be listening to my voice right now and thinking that's a load of rubbish, or I don't believe that for a second, whatever it might be, that is put to one side in hypnosis purely by slowing our brainwaves down. We're both in what's known as the beta brainwave state right now. We're awake, we're conscious, we're listening and critiquing what each other's saying. And when we relax into a hypnotic state, and I say relax, it's not all about relaxation, but that is a good starting point for it. Our brainwaves start to slow down. And initially they go into that alpha brainwave state, which is the next stage down from the beta state. Now, if you've ever caught yourself or seen anybody else that appears to be daydreaming, you know, just off in their own little world, not really interested in what's going on around them, that is the beginnings of a hypnotic state. That's when the brainwaves have slowed into an alpha brainwave state, and we're not aware, we're not bothered by the things that are going on around us. We're aware, but it doesn't impact our state. Now, when you go into hypnosis a little bit deeper and you get into what's called the theta brainwave state, which is the second slowest brainwave state, that's where the magic happens. That's where the prefrontal cortex and the thinking part of the brain almost gets shut off a little bit. And that's why when I'm with a client in hypnosis, when they're in that state, that's when I can talk to their subconscious mind, and there's no resistance from the brain. And so my words can go in and actually create new neural pathways in the brain. And fortunately now, with modern neuroscience and lots of different studies that are going on in universities around the world using functional MRIs and EEGs and various other tools, you know, the cutting edge of technology, really, it's showing what's happening in the brain now when we go into these states, where in the past, before we had that technology, it was all a bit woo and a bit out there, you know, but now it's actually getting a lot more credibility through hard science. And so that's a bit of background about what it is and how it works. But in terms of the things that it can help, it can literally help anything. But for me specifically, I work a lot with athletes, helping their sports performance.
Yeah. And for context, the subconscious mind is about 95% of our brain. Yet the way I kind of explain it is it's a yes person. If your conscious mind, if your active mind is saying, I'm rubbish, I'm not good at this, your subconscious is like, no worries, mate, we can help you with, fulfill that need. So whereas actually I saw an interesting video, Tony Robbins the other day, and it is talking about getting more into that subconscious mind. You hear of affirmations these days are very popular, in meditation, and it's all kind of feeding and getting it into the subconscious mind, because we can just say like, I'm great, but actually I don't really believe that, and there's no real truth to it, I'm just saying it. But if we get those reps in, and again in that sleepy state, that's what I kind of remember from The Power of the Subconscious Mind, was a fantastic book I read, and it talks about that sleepy state, affirmation, pre-falling asleep, pre-waking up. So yeah, it's interesting to see the the links between the two, and kind of knowing nowhere near your level, but I can understand how that works, because I said to you before I went on, this isn't a thing I saw in sport. Once we had somebody come in, and kind of tried to make a joke. It's like, look, do this stuff on the toilet. Picture yourself, scoring the winning goal and stuff like that. I think I did it for 2 seconds, and then everyone mocked it, and nobody did it. But we'll go down that route a little bit more with how you work with athletes and the pros and cons.
Absolutely.
But let's rewind. You were 8 years old, and you earned your black belt. Now, people, when they hear black belt, they think discipline, elite, master, sensei, all of this stuff. You are only 8 years old. Like, how did that even come about?
So I started training in Taekwondo, first of all, when I was 6 years old. Now, my dad was a big Bruce Lee fan, and he was at school when the whole Bruce Lee boom was happening, giving his age away a little bit there, but still. And I remember from such a young age him talking about doing flying side kicks across the common room with his mates and things like that. And so, even, as I say, at such a young age, I remember watching the Bruce Lee films on VHS tapes with my dad. And so I was a big fan, and I wanted to emulate that guy on there with the 6-pack and kicking everybody's backside, and just all the amazing stuff that he was doing in the films. And so my parents enrolled me in a local Taekwondo club. And as it happens, Doncaster, where I'm from, has always been a bit of a hotbed for Taekwondo, but martial arts a bit more broadly as well. Read into that what you will, but some of the top Taekwondo athletes and martial artists from the UK, but also around the world, are here. And so my first instructor competed in the Olympics. Her instructor, who was also sometimes my instructor, he was the Great Britain coach, and that was from day one. And so I was getting top level instruction very, very quickly. And I also had quite a good natural skill level for it. I picked it up quite well. I really enjoyed it. Didn't enjoy sparring at that time. I didn't enjoy fighting at that time, but I enjoyed learning and becoming proficient at the skills. And so, yeah, as you just said there, Shaun, I passed my black belt on the second time of asking, just before my 9th birthday. And it was quite surreal because of the disappointment of having failed it previously a few months prior. I forget exactly when it was, but it was only a few months. And to then have that pure joy of passing it at that age, to then, just kicking on with the martial art. And I actually ended up changing clubs after that. It's a whole thing, because ironically, there's a saying in martial arts that black belt is just the beginning. All the people that I trained with clearly thought it was the end, because they all quit as soon as they got their black belts. And so I was the only black belt in a class full of white belts at that point. And so obviously I wasn't getting as much out of it at that point. And so I ended up moving to a different club. And that's when I got more into the competitive side of things, and I progressed on from there. Yeah.
Now I'm going to get you to think back here. I don't know if it's difficult or not, how well you remember it.
Sure.
Failing at any point in your life is difficult. Failing a black belt, that I'm assuming by that age you knew what it was about, how big it was. How did you sound like you overcome it quite quickly, though, because you said it was only a couple of months till you did pass.
Yeah.
Do you remember that time? Do you remember that feeling when you did fail, and how you
I
bounced
remember
back?
all of it. Yeah, I remember all of it. So without boring you with the details too much, so I was one of, I believe, about 30, maybe 40 students from Doncaster that were testing for black belt at that time. And now the grading was in Stevenage. So we were all on a coach, big trip down to Stevenage, however long that took. And the grading took place in, I believe it was a college, if I remember correctly, because it was a big sports hall. And there were 10 Korean masters and grandmasters that had flown over from Korea for the grading. So they didn't know any of us from Adam. And the grading took place over a number of hours, and there was students from, my sort of age right up to adults testing for first degree, second degree, third degree, the Dan grades up after black belt. And the biggest thing I remember is being sat cross-legged at the end of the grading, all in rows, based on our grade and our age. So obviously the younger kids going for the black belts and whatnot were at the front, the adults going for higher grades were at the back. And the way that you found out whether you'd passed or not was that the chairperson on the panel read your name out if you'd passed. And if you'd failed, you got skipped. And I remember the person to my right, I don't remember if it was a boy or girl, whatever, I don't know. But that person got their name read out. So I knew that I would be next. And I wasn't next. They went on to somebody else further down the row. And that was the point when my heart just sank. And of course, I'm 8 years old in this big sports hall with all these other people and then all these intimidating grandmasters in front of me. And I was just trying to hold it together, just not to burst into tears, because I was absolutely devastated. And it turned out that one thing I didn't say as well, I was told before the grading by my instructor that I would walk it. So perhaps I went in with a bit of overconfidence thinking, yeah, I've got this, But that being said, I still remember trying my hardest. I wasn't complacent in there. And it just turned out that for whatever reason, that black belt grading panel that day was particularly harsh. And of all the students that went down from Doncaster, there were only 3 passed.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, the bus trip home was rather subdued.
Yeah. But I can only imagine that it is a difficult thing to get anyway. They're not just going to give it out to absolutely anybody.
Oh, absolutely.
So I love the fact that, I love the fact that they had, the masters, the grandmasters fly over. Like that's a pretty cool experience in yourself.
Yeah.
So that phase then from failure to going back to the next test.
Yeah.
What did you do within that time to turn things around?
So in all honesty, I don't remember too much of what I did in the interim between the 2 gradings. The thing that I remember specifically was after the first grading, feeling so devastated, and I just made a little vow to myself that I would never feel that way again. I never wanted to feel that way again. And it's the whole thing, which I'm sure you work with your clients and students as well, is, are we motivated by something that's pulling us towards an achievement, or are we motivated to get away from the pain of something? And for me at that point, it was getting away from that pain because I never wanted to feel that way again. It wasn't so much about getting the black belt at that point. It was just not feeling like that. And that was the big shift for me at that point. That was what made me kick on and make sure that I got the grade at the next time of asking, which I'm thankful that I did. And I've never failed a grading since. So yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I love that shift. It was actually, I didn't realize it was actually my last ever game, and we lost in a semi-final. And I said to everybody, remember this feeling. It sucks. It hurts. It's horrible. Nobody wants to talk. You got guys crying. Remember this feeling, so that you don't ever have to go through it again. I never got another shot at it, but again, that was how my journey finished. But I know some guys that that were in that room have gone on to win trophies. So it's that perception of, don't neglect that feeling. It's very normal. It's part of sport. It's part of life. But remember it so that you don't have to experience it again.
100%. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And your journey, went on through the Taekwondo. Like I said, other gradings, you've got, loads of trophies behind you. But at some point, you reached out for hypnotherapy. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
What brought that on?
Sure. So from the age of 13, I was competing internationally pretty much every year. I was representing either an England team or a Great Britain team. at least one big international tournament every year. Europeans, Worlds, various others. And having a lot of success with it, and I say that as modestly as I can. I won 4 world championships across my competitive career, 3 Europeans, 20 British titles. I did really well. When I was in my early 20s, and I say early 20s, I might have even been 20, I went through a phase where I was competing and I would just get really fatigued really quickly, to the point where I'd end up losing because of essentially a lack of fitness. It wasn't skill that I was losing on, it was the lack of fitness. And with hindsight being the wonderful thing that it is, I'm sure I could have been training more smartly. I'm sure I could have been fueling my body with my diet much more, much better. But it was between my ears that it was messing with. So much so that I'd be going into subsequent tournaments after this started happening, and I'd be thinking, oh my God, is it going to happen again? Am I going to get tired again? And once you're in that negative spiral, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I actually got referred to a local hypnotherapist by a friend of mine, and she'd been to see this guy, and he'd helped her with whatever her issue was. So she recommended him. Now, I didn't know much really about hypnotherapy at the time. I thought of the classic things, he's going to swing a pocket watch in front of my face. I'm going to start clucking like a chicken and all that kind of stuff. But I'd done some sports psychology as part of my sports science degree. And so I had an interest and an insight into sports psychology in and of itself. And I'd been doing a visualization practice before competing ever since I was 16. And so I knew that worked, and that always got me into the zone to compete as best I could. So I went to see this guy, and it was amazing. I can't tell you what he did because I can't remember, but it was fantastic. It just really shifted my state and my confidence in my fitness to the point where I wasn't worried about it anymore. And so I was able to go out and compete without having that cycle going round in my head of, you're going to get tired, you're going to get tired. That was gone. And so that really opened my eyes up to hypnotherapy as a modality to help me be better and to win more, not just something that's out there and a bit woo and a bit on the fringes, So yeah,
Okay,
that was
that's
how it came
interesting.
about.
Yeah, so it was definitely fitness lifestyle based. There was no, underlying medical issues or anything. It was just purely how you were living at the time.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I talk about my last season a lot because, the dream growing up, it was going to finish on a trophy and I was going to be the hero and everyone was going to be screaming my name. And it was actually one of my worst seasons ever because I was actually poorly. This was pre-COVID. All the signs of post-viral syndrome, long COVID, even before COVID came in. So whether it was just standard virus, but I had people in my head, you're old, you're unfit. I'm like, I'm not. Like, I'm 1 minute I'm buzzing, next minute I'm laying in my bed or I'm on the toilet again. And I don't know. I like if there was somebody there with something like this, or if my personal development skills were better at that time, maybe it wouldn't have gone on as long. But let's say that semi-final game I spoke about and I posted about the other day, I didn't play very well. Nobody remembers it. No fans, no players, just me. That I know that it was nowhere near my standard. And I think this is a big part of what athletes are missing is people to not just lean on, but trust and can find new ways, because players don't lose their ability. Performers, martial arts, anything, don't lose your ability. You lose the belief and the confidence. And it's finding a way to get that back. You see it all the time in football players. They move to another team and they're rubbish. No, you don't get a transfer and you're rubbish. What is missing there is that the coach, they don't like the coach doesn't trust them. There's something deeper. And I think players need to understand that more from an early level, that this, like you said, it isn't woo. it's actually just human behavior and human nature. It's actually very normal.
That's right.
And it doesn't have to feel or seem weird for it to work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that reminds me of a client that I had a couple of years ago now, who was an amateur cricketer, but he was playing at quite a high level, and he'd been a lifelong cricketer, played ever since he was a young kid, loved it. And he went through one bad game. For whatever reason, he was just off that day. Couldn't hit the ball. Every time he was bowling, it just wasn't, because he was an all-rounder, it just wasn't going where he wanted to put the ball. And seemingly everything was going wrong. And it just destroyed his confidence, to the point where in subsequent games, he could not perform. And it was affecting his mood. He didn't have depression, but he was feeling depressed. He was thinking about quitting the sport that he'd loved ever since he was a little kid. And that was something that we worked on. He tried adjusting his technique. He tried various different things in training. He tried messing with his diet to see if that was something, sleep, all the other things, all the other dominoes that you would try. He'd knocked them all over, and the issue was still there. And that's when he came to me. And that's one thing with hypnotherapy. It does seem to be the last resort for people. Once they've exhausted all their options, okay, yeah, I'll give that a try then. But with him, we got down to the root of what was going on with him, and we fixed that in his subconscious mind. And so much so that he was actually sending me screenshots after. I mean, he was getting changes during our time working together, but I think it was the week after we'd had our last session, he had a text message from the club captain saying that he was essentially back as the most valuable player on the team. He was that guy again, and they were so pleased that he was back and he'd gotten over what this issue was. And so, as you say, whatever that thing is, if it knocks your confidence in your ability or whatever it might be, and it might not even be related to the sport. That's the thing. It could be something completely separate as well, but it's affecting your performance on the pitch or on the field, whatever your sport is, in the ring, etc. So getting into that and addressing what's going on subconsciously is so key and so important if you want to perform to the best of your ability.
And I always say you'll never meet a more superstitious person than an ice hockey player on aid with, but it didn't take long before they were putting the other skate on first, or taping their stick the other way, and you kind of try something, but ultimately it just ends up in something happening that brings the confidence back again. You may change your stick 10 times, and on the 10th time you scored, but it's not the stick change. It just so happens you scored, and then again mentally you're back in your flow again, whereas you could potentially find that earlier with stop looking for the plaster, stop looking for the new stick or the new diet, and actually just do the work between your two ears.
100%. Yeah.
Now, you've done some work with somebody that when people mention hypnotherapy, they probably are thinking of a certain name. And we're name dropping all over this show today. I absolutely love it. You got some real big inspiration through your transformation from just having hypnotherapy to actually, coaching it. Who was that?
So I'm sure you're alluding to Paul McKenna.
That would be the one.
Yeah. So I was going through some personal issues the beginning of 2013. That's when it was. And it wasn't related to my sport. It was other stuff. And I just was not in a good place mentally at that point. And I was reading the Sunday Mirror newspaper on that day. So it will have been a Sunday. And there was a 2-page article in the middle of the newspaper by Paul McKenna about his new book on a technique that was called havening. Never heard of it. Was having a read through, found it really, really interesting. And down the right-hand side of the article, there was a little column where they were advertising a competition. And in this competition, Paul was going to select 3 people from anywhere in the UK to go to his house in central London, Mayfair, I believe it was, and for him to do the havening technique and some hypnosis with you to help you overcome whatever your issue was. Now, because of the state of mind I was in at the time, I just thought, what the hell? I'm going to enter. You know, I didn't expect to win, but I just gave it a go. And as luck would have it, I was selected. And so I went down to London. I believe it was a few months later. The May stands out to me. I think that was probably when it was. Went down there and walked in the front door of his house, and there he was with his PA, just stood chatting and whatnot. So I was a little bit awestruck, you know, at the time, because I'd seen this guy on TV so much and, you know, listened to some of his audios in the past and things like that. And we got talking, and turns out that we both have a massive admiration for Bruce Lee, which I didn't know about him before that day. So we had a lot to talk about there. And so he, you know, after the initial pleasantries and whatnot, then the schedule for the day began. And one of the other winners had been to see him privately because what they were going through was very traumatic. That was a real difficult thing, which I'll not go into. And the other person who won was with me at the same time. So we were kind of waiting together in his lounge and things like that. And I believe she saw him first and he took her through everything. And then he came to me afterwards. And once again, it was such a powerful shift in the way that I was feeling and thinking about things. Literally, to the point where the images that I was conjuring up in my mind went from being, you know, 4K, Ultra HD, big as the eye can see, to being quite small and grayscale and a bit blurry. And there was no emotion attached to them. It wasn't removing my memory, but there was no emotion there. It was disassociated from that memory. And it just really shifted the way that I was thinking and feeling at that time. And that was the light bulb moment for me. That's when I said to him, look, I want to learn this stuff. I need to get into this because it's blown my mind yet again. And I want to learn. I want to get qualified so that, you know, I mean, I got into it to help me. That was the whole thing. I wanted to make sure that I had the toolkit and I was able to get myself into the positions that I wanted to and excel the way that I wanted to. And I was thinking at the time, I can also help other people with this. And that's what I've always done. I've always gotten into something first to help me and then seen the benefits and almost been a guinea pig for it myself. And then I've gone out and helped other people with it. And so that's when he said, look, you should study the NLP practitioner qualification, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming for listeners that don't know, with Dr. Richard Bandler, who's the co-founder of the discipline, because he was Paul's mentor, which I also didn't know until that day. He taught Paul everything he knows, so Paul said. And so that's where I began. Pretty much on the train home, I think I was looking for that qualification and where it was running and whatnot. And he was running it in London later on that year, and I signed up there and then. And yeah, the rest is history.
This is why my favorite part of this show is what I talk about a lot, which is accidental intent, which there's an intent to everything. You just don't really know what it is all the time or how it's going to work. You just do something. You go to an event, you reply to a newspaper article, and then, you know, people are then sitting here and going, hey, this is what I do now because of that one moment. And, you know, just if you weren't, you know, at the bottom of the barrel, you may not have applied to the article and you may not be sitting here doing what you're doing. And that's why I just find that absolutely fascinating, because it is a common trend with the conversations I have. And you know, now you are doing it. And I know you said it helps any kind of area. You know, obviously I spoke about possibly being addicted to Pepsi Max, which was caffeine and lack of sleep. But, you know, how do you work specifically with athletes? What's the type of performer that comes to you? Is there a typical trend to what they're struggling with?
So it's interesting because everybody is an individual and they are experiencing their life in the way that they are experiencing it. That being said, with athletes, the trend tends to be anxiety. They want to perform, but something's holding them back. And as I said earlier, that might not be specifically to do with their sport. It might be something else going on in their lives that's filtering into it. And some athletes just want to perform better. You know, one of my clients who's an MMA fighter, he's a high level amateur with, you know, aspirations to go pro and get into the UFC and the whole thing, which I'm sure he will. He's interesting because he doesn't have anything holding him back. There's no anxiety issues. There's no past traumas. There's no nothing that needs addressing subconsciously. His thing is purely, I want to be the best I can. And he's looking for that little 0.1% that's going to help him to perform. Truth be told, I haven't come across many people like him. Usually there is something going on subconsciously, and oftentimes with the athletes, it does tend to be some anxiety issues for whatever reason. And we obviously get into all that and resolve that to then enable them to perform to the best of their ability in competition. But that tends to be the trend that I've seen anyway.
Yeah, I kind of just jotted that down as you started, and, you know, do they have to struggle? And you kind of explained that already, that actually, you know, it is open to the 1% that know there's more and are willing to try something that may be similar to you. You got referred by a friend initially, you know, they just, give this a go. This really worked for me. So that's interesting to hear. So you said anxiety is quite a main one. Is there anything else that normally pops up, or is that kind of the main area, just in case there is any athletes listening that might be interested?
So that tends to be the main area that I've seen, but then it's also the confidence issues, like the cricket player that I alluded to earlier. It's something that's happened oftentimes in the sport, but not necessarily, that's knocked their confidence. And that can transmute into a bit of anxiety with it, but not necessarily. So confidence and anxiety, those tend to be the main negative issues that athletes come to me with, whatever their sport is. But then you do get the few that just want to be the best that they absolutely can be. And it could even be something as well, just to circle back onto that, it could be they're coming off an injury, let's say. And even though physically the body is healing, or maybe has healed, do they have the confidence to go for it again? Do they have the confidence in that former injury site that it has actually fully healed and is as robust as it ever was, and they can go out and push themselves in training, in competition, things like that? So that's something else that has cropped up now and again in the past with certain athletes, where they are coming off an injury and they just don't have that confidence that they are healed and that they can give it their all again. So that is another issue that's, yeah, we've all been there. You know, if you're in any sport, you've been through some kind of injury, but it's just the extent to which that confidence has been knocked within you, whether you do seek out some help for that.
Yeah, I can see why that's the case for sure. So with this is, you know, hypnotherapy, NLP, sports psychologists are all becoming a lot more popular. You see it a lot more in professional sports. Obviously, the funding is there. Do you get many junior athletes coming in for any support, or is it mainly adults you see?
So of late, it's been mainly adults. But in the past, I have had a lot of juniors that have come to me as well. And these are kids that, well, full gamut really, of kids that are very young, sort of 6, 7 years old, and just starting out at the very grassroots level, and some kids who are in their early teens, 13, 14, 15, something like that, and they're already excelling. I've worked with a couple of kids who were on Team GB at the junior level in their sport, and both of them were anxiety cases, essentially. They were brilliant in training, super fit, technically proficient, and you know, for all intents and purposes, world beaters. But then when they got out into competition, it just wasn't happening. And for want of a better phrase, they would choke. And so, and one of them, he actually got referred to me by his coach 4 weeks before he was due to go and compete at the Junior Olympics on the other side of the world in Argentina. And they dangled the carrot that if he was to perform well at the Junior Olympics, and they didn't specify whether that meant getting a medal or what, as far as I'm aware, but the carrot was dangled that if he was to perform well, he would come back and be a professional athlete on the senior Team GB. So no pressure, you know, start seeing him 4 weeks before the biggest tournament of his life. But fortunately, he was a good student. He wanted to do better. He wanted to win. He wanted to achieve. And so the willing was there and the rapport was there between he and I. And he did what I asked him to do. And he went and performed the way that he should perform in the tournament. And he didn't get a podium place, unfortunately, but he came fourth, arguably the worst position you can come in. But he was just beaten by better people on the day. It wasn't his performance that was the problem. He just came up short on the day. And he then went on to compete for Team GB as a pro athlete. And so all ranges of kids, it can really help with, as long as they have a good support network and they're willing. Because that's one thing that you have to be mindful of, or I would have to be mindful of as the professional as well, is, are the parents helping or hindering at this point? And that's something where sometimes I've had to have a word with the parents as well. Like, you're not helping this situation. I need you to do this instead. And get them to facilitate things a little bit more when I'm not with their child. And it's interesting working with kids, because we only develop our critical faculties really from the age of like 9 up. And so kids up until that age are operating pretty much subconsciously. That's how they can have imaginary friends and just be off in their own little world for hours on end, because they're like sponges. They're in that state of development where they are just learning constantly, and their brain is just firing off neural connections back and forth. And so with kids, it doesn't even, one thing that's really good with working with kids is it doesn't have to be the classic sit down or lie down, eyes closed, I'm going to talk at you for an hour, that kind of thing. I've had it before where I had a kickabout with a kid in his garden while giving him suggestions and getting him to visualize, who's your favorite footballer? Ronaldo. Okay, great. Imagine you're Ronaldo, that kind of thing. Another one, it was a little kickboxer, and I had him on the pads, getting him to visualize his favorite fighter, this kind of thing. And so the approach with kids can be different, but everybody, regardless of age, as long as they're willing, we all can tap into this.
Are you happy with the mindset application implementation within sport? And if not, what do you think needs to change?
It's an interesting question, because I can't comment too deeply on the structure of things, because I haven't worked within it as an employee. My work has always been private, and I'll either get referred by a coach, or the athlete will come to me, or the parents will come to me directly. So it's not within the structure of a team or an organization. But what I will say is, I don't think it's necessarily fully utilized. And I'll give a couple of examples to color that. In my previous life, I was a personal trainer. and S&C coach. And a number of years ago, I was working with a guy who was playing for Scunthorpe United at the time. And I'll name drop him again. He won't mind. Cam Burgess. He plays for Ipswich now. They've just gone up into the Premiership. And I asked him at the time, what's it like with sports psychology in professional football and this kind of support? And he just said to me, oh, well, the club usually has a sports psychologist and they just say, this person is there if you want to use them. And that's it. And he never did. He never needed it. But to his knowledge, a couple of players went to see the sports psychologist, but generally they weren't really bothered. They didn't get it. They didn't see the necessity for it. And so for me, that's kind of inherently wrong, because you've got this professional there that's being underutilized, and it's almost like a bit of a flippant thing. Yeah, they're there if you want them. You don't have to, whatever. And another example where I was speaking to a former high-level athlete, Team GB, a number of years ago, and she was going through a really difficult time in her relationship while she was competing at the top level, Olympics and world champs and all that. And she asked for help within the organization of her sport. And the sports psychologist that they were working with said, well, we can't help you with that because it's not to do with your sport. So don't talk to us about it. And that just blew my mind at the time, because I'm like, well, hello, she's performing pretty subpar when she's in her sport, because she's got all this stuff going on outside that's taking up all her brain space and just draining her emotionally and physically. So she can't perform. But yet you guys won't talk to her about that because it's not related to her sport. So for me personally, those two examples don't shine a great light on it. But hey, I address athletes holistically, so I'm here for it. If your organization isn't helping you out with that, come and give me a call.
Yeah, amazing. Stuart, if there is anybody listening right now, athlete or somebody who's struggling with, I don't know, maybe addiction or just, like you said, anxiety, lack of confidence, where can they find you? Is there anything they can implement, to get themselves started?
Sure. So on most of the socials, I am known as the Mind Coach. On my website, I do have a free newsletter, and when you sign up to that, you get a free audio recording to help you visualize. It's a guided visualization that I've recorded to really help you get clarity on that vision and to start wiring your nervous system to help you go towards it. And I also include a PDF guide with how to optimally visualize as well when you sign up to that free newsletter. So that's on my website. That's generally what I point people towards. If they have something a bit more nuanced or a bit more specific that they'd like some advice on, I'm more than happy to have a chat to anybody that has any questions or wants to know a little bit more information. And so typically I would just give them my email address or tell them to DM me on the socials, and we coordinate from that.
Yeah. And this is coming from somebody who used to think all of this stuff was woo. This is real stuff. This is understanding how the brain works. And if you are skeptical, well, just give it a go. Just download the newsletter, try the visualization, try meditating, just give it a go. If it doesn't work, at least then you've tried, but you may surprise yourself. And it could be the start of something that you didn't know you needed, just like all the accidental intents that we spoke about through the show and on today's episode as well. So I'd highly recommend giving it a go. Stuart, thank you so much for coming on today and making space for me in such a short space of time. I do really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Shaun. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you. And I normally round this off with my kind of little end tagline, but I think this is even going to be the title of the show, because I want to remind everybody that the black belt is just the beginning, and just listening to today's episode is just the beginning. Every day it's just the beginning of something else. You don't know what is coming, but if you implement, if you grow and learn, it can take you in directions that, you know, you don't even know what's positive stuff is coming your way. So I'm going to leave it on your tagline today rather than my one.
Yep, it's a good one. And just to piggyback on the back of that, Shaun, just briefly, Dr. Richard Bandler, who I first studied NLP with, as I said earlier, he had a little saying that I remember he talked about when we were on the course. If you're not getting smarter, you're getting stupider. And that's the thing, as you just alluded to there, it's each day you wake up, what are we going to learn? How are we going to grow? How are we going to move forward? What are we going to learn? And you always have a choice which way you're going to play it. And sometimes you might decide that you're not interested and you need that headspace, you need that time away, but get busy living or get busy dying. It's the same principle.
It really is. It really is. Thank you for everybody that has joined us today. If you've taken anything away, as usual, a review, a share of the episode. The aim is just to help one person. If it's helped you, brilliant. We've done our job. If you know somebody this can help, please send it straight to them. It may be their thing that they needed to see and hear today. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stuart. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.